more will show up. Joe Macero, who has been here from Energy in Depth, actually he's out Pittsburgh way, but we have Rachel from Energy in Depth.
Hello.
And our presenter tonight is Dave Messersmith. I've known Dave for a long time because he's very involved in cooperative extension. I've never heard him speak on the gas industry, but he knows lots about dirt and nutrient management and all those good things that farmers have to stay on top of.
Right.
So we welcome you, Dave.
Okay, great. Thank you, Donna. And Donna said that you guys usually have a speaker for about 2 hours. So I think we're all set for that this evening.
He's pulling your leg.
Yeah. Actually, I think we're going to go for maybe 45 minutes tonight. And then we certainly welcome questions. If you have questions or comments as we go through, you can raise your hand or just speak up and we'll do questions. As Donna mentioned, my background, like most of you, is natural gas. My background is in agriculture, so I traditionally have done a lot of work with crops and soils and weed control, soil fertility. But really the past 5 years or so, it's been almost entirely natural gas related stuff. So, like many of you, we've learned a lot of information along the way, and we try to share that with people we speak with. I'm not quite sure how I was billed this evening in the agenda. I told Joe I could talk about a couple of different things, but I'm going to focus most of my time talking about European perspectives on shale gas development. And it's something that's kind of interesting and probably a little bit different for you. We've done a lot of work recently with groups, several dozen groups from Europe, and most countries over there, both hosting them here. We've had probably a dozen or more visit the northern tier in Pennsylvania, and we've been over there quite a bit as well, in a variety of countries, and really sharing what our experience has been with the gas industry in Pennsylvania. So I thought I'd share that tonight. I hope it's of interest to you. It's certainly been kind of interesting to me to host groups here and share what our experiences have been. Does it sound interesting? Yes? Okay.
Are we kind of the leader? They're coming to us?
They are, yeah. And just a real quick background. Of course, the U.S. is really led the world in shale gas development. And Canada is probably a close second. There's a lot of development going on in Canada, Western Canada. And there's a lot of potential to develop shale gas in Europe and around the world, but really they haven't begun developing things commercially yet. So they're still in the very early exploration stage. They're trying to get a handle on what their potential is. And at the same time, they're trying to develop regulations and developing an understanding of the industry. So that's kind of where they are. So then I wanted to share a little bit about Europe's energy background, where they get their energy from. Talk about some of the issues that they have with developing this new industry over there. Talk a little bit about what I think will happen in Europe around shale gas. And then if we have a couple of minutes left, I have a couple of new data points about how ag has been impacted in Pennsylvania by shale gas development. And I think that might be of interest. So we have spent a lot, as I mentioned, we spent a lot of time recently, a lot of my colleagues and myself, both hosting groups here. So we've hosted groups from Germany, the UK, Ireland, China, Japan, South Africa, Poland, a number of countries. We've hosted them here in Susquehanna County, Bradford County. And we tried to have them meet with groups like yourselves to get kind of first-hand experiences. How you feel about development, what your experiences have been. And we also try to talk to them a little bit about the technology and how the industry operates around the area. And we've also been to a number of countries to sort of share that same thing over there. So we've been, recently a group of us were in Poland. This photo here, this is a photo from last week in Poland. We met with a number of different groups. So that's at the University of Warsaw, which is one of the leading universities over there. And they're interested in kind of understanding some of the impacts and some of the research that we've done at Penn State around shale gas. This photo here is a couple of my colleagues, Tom Murphy and Matt Henderson, talking in Lithuania. They were over there back in March, again sort of sharing what our experiences have been. This is a group from Germany, a group from a number of university researchers from Germany that we hosted in Pennsylvania about a year and a half ago. They spent a number of days over here, kind of on the ground, looking at what shale development looks like here in Pennsylvania. And then this is a group, I believe, from the UK. We hosted them back in February, I believe. And again, we tried to show them on the ground what it looks like, as well as meet with them and talk about what, again, our experiences. This is an interesting flyer. This was actually the flyer that they used to advertise our presentation at the University of Warsaw. And I know you can't read it, and I can't interpret that either. But the cartoon I thought was interesting, and they assured us that it was genuine. They were, I don't know if I can make that bigger. They assured us that they were not making fun of us, but it looks a little bit like they were. But they interpreted this as being kind of a husband and wife here in Pennsylvania. The wife is barbecuing and saying, Joe, what are you doing? And he's got a little drill here, and he says he's drilling for shale gas.
They would have cooked quicker with natural gas.
Yeah, you have open flame there as well. But anyway, they assured us it was in good taste. But you do have to wonder, and you wonder if the interpretation that we received was good. Just maybe a real quick background. Again, there's a lot of interest in shale gas in Europe. There's a number of shale gas basins that have potential across the main continent, as well as the United Kingdom and Ireland as well. But they're at a very early stage in development, or in really exploration at this point. Probably less than 100 wells drilled across the entire continent, and only a handful of them, maybe a dozen of them, had been hydraulically fractured at this point. So again, very early in exploration, but certainly lots and lots of interest in shale gas. Overall, Europe is kind of known for being interested in renewable energy, but really still not, it represents a really small portion of their overall energy use, roughly about 5%. Energy conservation is pretty big. They really are pretty good at practicing energy conservation on the ground. And when you visit there, it's kind of it's almost an awakening in a way. A lot of the rooms that you have, the lights automatically go on when you enter the room, and then when you leave the room, there's no motion, they go off automatically. Just a lot of neat conservation measures, lots of building codes that are in place to make sure that new buildings are built energy efficient. So that's pretty big for them. Europe is not a real huge user of natural gas. They use about 2/3 of what the U.S. uses annually, somewhere around 15 trillion cubic feet of gas. But the U.S. consumes somewhere between 20 and 25 trillion cubic feet. And then one of the real big parts about natural gas in Europe is most of the natural gas, or the majority of gas that they consume in many countries, comes directly from Russia via pipelines. So much of the discussion in Europe around natural gas revolves around sort of that aspect, and trying to get more independent from direct natural gas from the former Soviet Union. So it's a little bit different than us. We talk about energy independence, and it's, I think, in some ways a patriotic thing for us. But in Europe, it's really more of a core value and historic reliance on Russia for a lot of their energy. This is just a graph that shows Europe's energy usage, the different sources of where their energy comes from over the past, I guess, 40-some years. So it looks a little bit like the U.S. They rely a lot on coal, oil. The green is natural gas, so they're a pretty significant user of natural gas. Hydroelectric, there's some pretty big hydroelectric facilities. Renewables, again, a lot of interest, but not a lot of adoption or deployment of renewables yet. And then nuclear. A lot of, some countries are pretty big into nuclear energy. France, which we'll show you in a minute, but nuclear is pretty big in some countries as well.
Question. What does this lead to as far as the production in the United States? Because right now we're shipping to the Netherlands and Denmark, Norway, so on and so forth, by tanker ship. And once they get the Russian pipelines installed with their gas, natural gas or whatever, we're gonna lose our market in Europe.
Right. Yeah, well, the U.S. has just actually gotten 2 approvals, or the U.S. has actually approved 2 facilities to export LNG. So we're not currently in that game at this point. There's a lot of interest in exporting natural gas as LNG, but we're really not doing that at this point.
To this point in your presentation here, basically you're talking that Russia's going to be supplying them with natural gas. I mean, what?
But the potential is one of the reasons they're interested in what's happening in the U.S. is that they're looking at U.S. exports and possibly either importing gas from the U.S. Via tanker, or having the U.S. be a kind of a global competitor and help reducing global natural gas prices. So it's a bit of a dynamic. Maybe I'll bring it home. There's another slide that I'll show you. I might bring it home a little bit more closely for you. And one of the interesting things is that as the U.S. has switched over to more natural gas fired power plants, the price of coal has decreased quite a bit. So we're actually shipping a lot of coal these days to Europe. So a lot of American coal from West Virginia, from Pennsylvania, is actually being shipped to Europe. But I think I will bring home maybe some of the questions that you had in a couple of slides there.
So I'm looking for my bottom line. Is our market gonna come apart? Because a large amount of our natural gas is being shipped to Europe, to Canada. I don't know how much of that is, but there certainly is potential for that to happen. Absolutely. This is a look at, if you look at all of the European nations as a whole, where they buy their natural gas from. And this is up here in the corner. This is sort of what they get via pipeline. So they get about 3/4 of their natural gas via pipeline. Most of that's from Russia. Some of it's from Norway and other countries. And then about 1/4 of it comes from LNG shipped in via tankers. So they're still getting a pretty large portion of their natural gas via pipeline, but they are importing some as LNG as well. And then these are the specific countries where they're importing gas from. Again, about 1/3 of it comes from the Soviet Union, from the former Soviet Union. A little bit less than 1/3 of it from Norway. And then most of these are from the Middle East, some of the Caribbean, but coming in the form of LNG via tanker. So again, a lot of the discussion in Europe revolves around sort of that Russian influence and how they can get more independent from Russia and develop more domestic sources of gas for them. And this is just another view. This is, you can't see it at the bottom. These are, this represents the percent of natural gas that
those countries use that is directly from Russia. It really depends on which country you're looking at, but France receives a relatively small amount of gas from Russia. Germany and Poland receive about 50% of what they use directly from Russia. Some of the former Soviet bloc countries receive a much higher amount. So again, a lot of discussion revolves around that Russian influence. And this is just looking more closely at some of the different countries. Again, some of the same information. Again, a lot of the gas that some countries burn or consume in Poland is over 80%. That is from directly from Russia. And it's interesting that they still rely really heavily on coal. So most of their coal, most of their electricity generation is from coal in Poland. And then France, just as a comparison, it's really a completely different picture. Most of the electricity generation in France is nuclear, and a very small percentage comes from, about 4% comes from natural gas. And they get natural gas from a variety of places. Some of it's from Russia via Germany and some other places like that, but a much more diverse picture. So to flip back to Poland, Poland's one of those countries that's very bullish, very interested in developing shale gas resources. And it goes back to this picture. A lot of the gas that they get comes directly from Russia. And they also lived under that Russian influence, Russian communist influence for many years. Compared to France, France is much less interested in developing shale gas. And really the reason is that they currently have a pretty diverse profile. They're getting gas from a lot of different places. And they're also very big on nuclear energy. So they're sort of set up as a nation to utilize nuclear power. And they're really not interested in, as a nation, developing other resources for electricity and other energy. So maybe getting back to your question that you had, as I mentioned, a lot of countries in Europe, as they're beginning to explore and understand what kind of shale gas resources they have, a lot of them are looking to the U.S. and they're looking at a number of different things that are happening here. One, they're interested in the energy independence piece. So a lot of Europeans are fascinated by the dramatic change in America's natural gas abundance. So they're looking at that and they're trying to understand how can they replicate that or how can they duplicate what's happened in the U.S. in their own country. So they're very interested in, you go back 10 years in time, the U.S. was ramping up to be a big importer of natural gas. And 10 years later, we're looking at doing just the opposite. So a lot of European countries are interested in sort of duplicating what has happened here. They're interested in a lot of Europeans have seen Gasland. They've seen a lot of the media from the U.S. So they're interested in learning about, when we visit with them, they want to know what the impacts have been to us. So you, as a landowner here in shale country, they want to know what your experience has been. So we spend a lot of time talking about, sort of real stories and talking about what's happened, kind of on the ground. They're also certainly interested in sort of that economic piece. They realize that developing a shale industry would be an economic boon for their countries, would generate jobs, would generate tax revenue. So they're interested in that aspect. They're also looking at the U.S. They're looking at, again, our new abundance of natural gas and how that will affect the world market. So there's been some announcements recently. The UK has recently announced that they're going to be, they signed a long-term contract with the Cheniere LNG facility on the Gulf Coast. So they'll be importing a lot of natural gas from that facility from the U.S. over a span of about 10 years in the UK. Poland is currently building a big LNG facility on their coast, and they're looking at contracting with export facilities in the U.S. for delivering natural gas over a long period of time. So direct imports, as well as they're looking at, again, they want to see the global price of LNG in Europe is somewhere around $10 to $15 per MCF, so quite a bit higher than it is here in the U.S. So they're interested in how the U.S. Exports will affect that global price and how that may lower their price of gas. And then I guess they're also interested a little bit in some of their global political dynamics. Again, sort of that Russian influence. This was actually a newspaper. This is the international version of the New York Times. When we were in one of the airports over there, we picked this up, and it was just talking about that whole picture about as the U.S. becomes more energy independent, how will that affect our foreign policy? So as we have less, as we're relying less on oil and gas from the Middle East, how does that affect our policy towards some of those countries? The one thing that's really interesting when you travel outside of the U.S. is the concept of mineral ownership. And there's essentially two models of mineral ownership in the world. One is the first model, and that's exclusively what you see in the U.S. Private citizens own mineral rights. So you, as landowners, for the most part, own the minerals that are underneath of your property. And you have the right to lease them, you have the right to gain financially from the development of those resources. What you find is that that's an exclusively an American kind of phenomenon. Every other country that I'm aware of operates under the second model, where the state, the nation, the government owns the mineral right, and then the private citizens own essentially the surface and maybe a few yards of soil under the surface. So one of the things that you find out really quickly when you begin sort of learning about development in other countries is that a lot of the conversation in this part of Pennsylvania revolves around that landowner piece and the direct benefit that landowners are seeing from the development of natural gas. But you don't find that really anywhere else in the world. That's really unique to the U.S. And one thing that we're seeing, at least discussed and maybe trying to be developed in a lot of countries, is they're trying to figure out, okay, we know that shale gas development impacts local areas, so there is an impact from a well pad being developed, traffic, etc. So they're trying to figure out a way to compensate either individual landowners or individual communities that are experiencing development in their areas. So it's kind of an interesting thing. In the U.S., we don't really think about it. It's something that we've grown up with, and that's the way things are. But it's really exclusively something that we have. I want to move into talking perhaps more about some of the constraints that many of the European countries have looking at trying to develop shale gas. Perhaps not different than some of the states here in the U.S., but a lot of the regulations are pretty complex. So if you think that regulations are complex in Pennsylvania or New York, it's probably much more complex than many of the European countries. They also have sort of added regulatory levels within the European Union, so it's not really a federal government kind of thing, but it's the European Union has a lot of influence, as well as regulations that influence what happens in their individual countries. There is organized opposition in a number of countries, so they've seen gas land, and some people have decided to sort of mobilize around around that information. One thing that's really interesting is that you have a really limited industry at this point, a really limited shale gas industry. So, here in the U.S., if you're a company and you want to bring in a rig to develop a well pad, you simply pick up the phone. A week later, they drive a rig in from Oklahoma or Colorado, set it up, and they kind of go to work. But in Europe, it's a process. They don't really have the rigs there, so it's a process that it takes months to pack it up onto a ship, bring it over, bring workers over to assemble it, operate the rigs. They don't have the support industry, so as they begin the well completion process, where they're trucking in water, setting up the hydraulic fracturing process, again, they just don't have that infrastructure in place to do that. And we talked about that mineral ownership thing. It's something that's kind of holding them back. We're trying to figure out, again, how to compensate the landowner for the development that's occurring when they don't really have any kind of mineral ownership themselves. A couple more constraints. Every shale is different. Geologically, every shale is different. So the Marcellus, we know, is highly productive, and the industry has gotten pretty good at completing those wells and getting really good production from the Marcellus. But at least initially in Europe, they've had trouble completing and trying to get good production from some of those initial wells. So they're definitely not like the Marcellus, and they probably won't be as productive overall as some of the better shales in the U.S. Yes?
How extensive are the gas shales in Europe?
Geographically, most countries have some sort of deposit. One thing that we saw initially about 2011 when they were first being kind of discovered and assessed. We saw these really astronomical estimates on the capacity of what they were able to produce. And then a couple of years later, they were severely downgraded, so downgraded to maybe 10% of what was originally estimated to be there. So
So it's a lot like when they originally,
very much like what happened
Marcellus
here,
here,
yes.
and when they did their test wells outside of the area, they found out it was a dead zone, it's
Right.
bluestone area,
Right,
basically.
so they're going through that same process over there to some degree. But I would say even with that in mind, probably overall it's probably not going to be, a number of the basins over there probably won't be as productive as some of the wells we have here locally. So maybe we're very fortunate to have the shell into the ground here that we do have. We talked about this. Developing a well in Europe is much more expensive, it costs about twice as much to do so there as here. The one factor that's in favor of that is that the value of gas is twice, 2 or 3 times more than it is here in the U.S., so there is some competitive advantage there. I think we talked about this. We are seeing some, Russia certainly is not interested in the rest of the world developing shale gas, because they've enjoyed being the major supplier for much of the world. So they're kind of, they're doing some things trying to lower their price in Europe a little bit, so that it may slow or stall their own shale development. They're actually putting in some new pipelines from Russia across different parts of Europe, again to try to perhaps slow down the development of some of the European shales.
That also helps answer some part of that question that I had, that it's cheaper for us, or it may be cheaper for them to import natural gas than it is to develop it in their own.
Very much, yes, yeah.
Especially if they don't have land rights or mineral rights.
Right, and the one thing that's interesting about Russia is they're subsidizing the pipelines that are being built.
Yeah.
They're not going to be a cost-effective endeavor, but they're building in many ways so that they can try to lock in that market, prevent Europe from developing their own shale, and perhaps prevent.
It's a major undertaking right now. They're developing ships in mass quantities now to ship it to Europe, probably in order to circumvent the Russian pipeline
Right.
costs.
And maybe one last interesting thing, I don't know if it's a constraint, but some of the Europeans think, at least the view that they think is, at least with the American corporations that are operating over there, Marathon, XTO is an operator, Chevron, a lot of those corporations are seen as being some American influence on the development. So maybe perhaps a little bit like some people view some of the offshore operators operating here. So they're seeing some development as maybe an overt American influence on what's occurring over there. This is the most current map that I've seen about what's this regulation-wise, what's occurring in Europe as far as moratoriums. So the countries that are highlighted are countries that have some significant amount of shale gas that can be developed. And then the red circles with an X are the countries that have a moratorium, at least temporarily. And then the green circles are countries that are allowing shale gas development. And then the green circles with a P are countries that are allowing development and have also issued permits for testing and development. So it's really pretty diverse. Of course, I think you're aware France has a moratorium that they've had for some time. A lot of the former Russian Federation countries are very interested in, again, trying to get more independent. So they're sort of interested in developing their own resources. Poland is probably one of the countries that are leading development in Europe. They've drilled 44 wells so far in Poland. Germany is sort of proceeding cautiously, I would say. They've not drilled a couple of wells at this point, but they're interested. And then Great Britain and the UK, there's some early development going on there as well.
How are you seeing that this would affect us? I mean, if we exported the gas, then prices would go up here, which would make it better for the royalty people, but not so great for the standard citizen.
Yeah, there's been
Are
some.
we helping our country by keeping the gas for ourselves as opposed to getting rid of it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, there's been some studies done by looking at what the effect would be on the price of gas domestically if we did export, and most of the studies indicated that it wouldn't have a significant impact on the price. It might be, the ones that I've seen are from several tens of cents per 1,000 cubic feet up to maybe $1.
But would
or
we
so.
be
So-
reducing our ability to prevent bringing in imports of oil and stuff if we could keep the gas here? Would we be better off to keep the gas ourselves? Or would
Yeah, I
it
mean,
be better
it's-
to sell it and get some money?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, if you're talking about any other commodity or any other good that we're exporting, we love exporting stuff. So, in my view, natural gas should be no different. I think we should export natural gas if it makes sense. If we have the supply and we can find a market for it.
Most shale deposits have a subterranean shale deposit below that, which contains more natural gas, if not crude oil. Is that not correct?
It depends on where you're at. I mean, it's true of some areas.
Because it's what, the Utica shale below the Marcellus?
Yeah, I mean, the Utica is not going to be
Which extends it
universally.
another maybe 50 to 100 years beyond the 100-year time frame we're talking already?
Right, I mean, there's certainly other shale deposits that will be developed.
Which would make us a major supplier of petroleum products or natural gas
Right.
to the world,
Um,
until they develop in Russia and also in Arabic nations. They're going for natural gas too.
Russia's gas pocketed gas or is that shale gas?
It's conventional gas, it's not,
Like
not shale gas, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and they've really been very slow at considering or even adopting shale gas developments. Russia has a lot of shale gas reservoirs that could be produced, but to date they've really not shown much interest in developing any of those.
How about infrastructure in Europe? Is there a lot of infrastructure over there for gas?
There's a lot of pipeline infrastructure in place currently to, sort of for the current system, and they're really ramping up their ability to import LNG, liquefied natural gas.
That's what I was wondering, if they had the ability, once we got it there, if they had the ability to distribute it.
They're building that now, so they're ramping up that ability. I don't know if I answered your question adequately enough, but it's there have been studies, a number of studies done in the U.S. looking at what the impact that exports would have on the price of natural gas domestically, and most of the studies indicate that there would not be a major impact on the price, at least within the next 10 years or so. So it would have some minor impact, but it wouldn't have a major impact on the price. And then this is, I think, the last slide that I wanted to really present about Europe. Perhaps just maybe a summary and where I think things will be headed. Shale gas, I think, will continue to be slowly developed in Europe. So they're looking at, a lot of countries are looking at maybe having some development going on, production beginning maybe 2020. So that's 7 or 8 years from now. 2 countries to watch: the United Kingdom and Poland. Those are both countries that, governmentally, politically, they're ready to adopt shale gas development. They've had some test wells go in. They've done some exploratory wells, so they appear to be taking the lead. As happened here, the industry, as they do the test wells, as they begin to produce, they'll refine their techniques, and they'll get better production out over time. So we saw that occur here, and we'll see that occur over there probably. And then we'll continue to see the moratoriums. France, as we talked about initially, they have a good system in place for nuclear energy, so they're probably not going to be very anxious to develop shale gas in France and probably some other countries as well. So we'll see some moratoriums persist. And that's all that I had on Europe. I hope that has at least some relevance or maybe some interest to all of you. I'd be happy to entertain any more questions that you might have.
Well, that kind of helps explain some of the questions I had in the beginning.
Yeah.
Where is Europe, as far as our exporting to Europe, which is a major concern to our petroleum companies right now, keeping that line into Europe versus what they are doing now. But you say, you have X amount of places that permits are applied, others are permits pending, and others have restrictions.
Right.
The French are always the French, they never go with anybody's.
That's true. Yeah, I'm glad you said that. The one thing to think about is
Because that makes a difference in our royalties and our, how much.
it does. One thing to think about is the cost competitiveness. Again, the price of gas in Europe, natural gas in Europe, is somewhere around $12 to $15 per 1,000 cubic feet.
We're at what, 485, 5
The cost to liquefy it and ship it to Europe is somewhere in the neighborhood of $4 to $6 per 1,000 cubic feet. So as our domestic price fluctuates, we'll be more or less competitive on the global market for exports. So, when gas is $2 per 1,000, it makes a lot of sense to export gas. Very competitive on the global market. If gas is $6, it's really more of a break even to liquefy it and ship it to.
Well, none of these are an actual threat to our gas production in the next 25 years possibly?
Yeah, no, certainly not, yeah. And there's other countries as well. South Africa has an abundant reserves of shale, China as well. But they have many of the same constraints. They just don't have the industry there. So it'll take them years to sort of ramp up, develop their own industry, their own infrastructure. It'll take years for that to occur.
Are we exporting the gas now?
Not to any great degree. We're exporting some to Canada, and as you said,
In the Netherlands, yeah.
I'm not sure exactly what happens to
If
the
you went back to
Canada.
that one map, you'll see where I believe it was Norway has
Okay.
no natural
Because they
gas.
say switch to natural gas, you know, it's cheaper and so forth. Wouldn't we be better developing our own place here before we start exporting a lot?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, there are currently 2 new facilities that have been approved to be converted into an export, LNG export facility in the US. So we're, and there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 or 6 additional plants that have applications in or requests them to get permits to.
I mean,
Yes,
the private citizen having use of the natural gas,
Not to know,
other than the royalties.
not to say, but they're actually shipping it to major cities. One ship will dock at a major city and they just draw off of that ship. Like Stockholm, Sweden.
But I can't draw off.
No, but you can't. No, but they could ship a tanker over there and
Well, I
draw
see
it
what you
to a
mean,
major
yeah,
city.
absolutely.
It's
I think
not,
it makes,
it's not, doesn't feed the country, it just feeds a major portion of a
Right.
city or something like that.
I think your question now, it certainly makes lots of sense to develop our local markets, make sure that all of our residents have the ability to get service at their homes as well as service for natural gas vehicles.
And that goes back to the infrastructure that we develop here, you
Right,
know,
right.
and that is happening slowly,
Right.
for vehicle use and, I see a couple of our school districts are looking to utilize the natural gas.
Right, and it makes a lot of sense, looking at the long-term price, consumer price of natural gas. In the US, it's expected to be pretty competitive against any other source of energy for the next.
Chesapeake Energy
Some
has,
decades.
I believe they said that there will be 55 natural gas stations on the I-81 corridor in Pennsylvania
Okay,
within the next 3 years. Natural gas filling stations.
very good. A question, sir?
Do you know if Central and South America has gas shale deposits?
I don't know, I'm not, I haven't heard too much about any of those. There is some in Mexico, actually. I'm not really aware of what else what might be in Central and South America. The fact that I haven't heard much would lead me to believe there's not a lot of interest there at this point.
So that could be export.
Very much, and there's been some recent press about the growing demand in Mexico and our ability to supply Mexico with natural gas. We used to actually import a fair amount of gas from Mexico. But now we're exporting much more than we import from them. And there's a lot of projects that are being built to transport gas in Mexico right currently.
The other pipeline?
Yeah.
The other pipeline?
the other pipeline.
Coming up north, we're sending them.
Yeah. So we're still, it's a little bit, we still import stuff from Mexico, but we send a lot more there than we import.
You didn't mention anything about Italy.
Italy, as far as I know, does not have any shale deposits.
Okay.
There is one of the Russian pipelines that are being built currently. It's a southern European pipeline. And that would actually that would terminate in Italy. So they're looking to sort of wrap up that market with that pipeline.
The article that I read on Italy, in northern Italy, they suspect that they could possibly do some drilling of but nothing from the southern or the northern part south because of their quake zone.
Okay.
they're just it's too fragile, they're afraid of infrastructure problems.
Okay. If I had 2 more minutes, I'll present just a couple of slides. One of the things that we get asked about a fair amount is about, again, sort of local impacts. People are interested in understanding how natural gas development has impacted the community and the industries that are here currently. So we talk a little bit about agriculture. Again, it's a little bit different because, farmers are land rich, so they also have the benefit in many cases of getting royalties from development, which would not occur or may not occur in other countries. But there are some similarities. In many of the European countries, agriculture is their #1 industry, followed by tourism, which is very similar to Pennsylvania. One of the things we talk about, these are the counties that are highlighted in red, are the top 10 agricultural counties by sales. So Bradford County, Susquehanna, I'm not quite sure where it ranks, but it's, I believe it's in the top 15 statewide, so it's a big agricultural county. So there certainly are some, looking at these counties, lots of dairy going on, big dairy industry, as well as lots of development. And then also down here, there's some dairy down in the southwest corner, as well as lots of development. So we can talk about, when we talk about ag and other areas, we sort of talk about that interaction with the landowner and how they receive royalties and what that means. The one thing that we really lack is a lot of good data. So we understand, we know lots of people that are receiving royalties. We know lots of good stories and anecdotal evidence about what's occurring. But really, this is really the only piece of data that we have, and we just sort of recently updated it. This is a graph that looks at the number of dairy cows that are, the blue line is in the Marcellus counties. So that would include 5 counties, Susquehanna, Bradford, Tioga, I think Wyoming, and Lycoming. 5 counties. So lots of dairy cows in these 5 counties compared to the statewide average. And the statewide total divided by 10, so it's on the same plane. So what we're looking for with the data is there some impact, or is there some influence on the number of dairy cattle that we're seeing in the Marcellus counties versus what's happening statewide? And it's really tough to tell. This sort of marks the 2008, 2007 marks sort of the time frame when we might start seeing an impact. Some laws were being developed. People started receiving royalties. So if we were going to see an impact, it would happen somewhere in here. And I guess really the thing that we're trying to point out, the thing we're seeing statewide between 2001 and 2007, the dairy industry decreased about 9.8%. So the number of cows that we had statewide decreased almost 10%. But in the Marcellus counties, it decreased about 24%. So much steeper decline pre-Marcellus during that period of time. Declined much more rapidly here in the northern tier than it did statewide during that time.
So in other words, they're getting money enough to sustain their farms.
And then currently, since 2008, really the decline has been pretty much the same. So the Marcellus counties declined about 1.5%. The statewide average declined about 2.2%. So pretty much the same rate of decline. So what we would maybe suggest is that in here, perhaps some of the Marcellus money is helping to maybe sustain at least some farms, or maybe maintain the level of dairy cattle in some of the farms that we have.
And we know people if that's happened.
Right. The tough thing to do is really get good data. There's not a lot of good data on
And there's been some farmers that have sold their cows, but now they're buying back
Okay,
because they're getting royalty money,
okay.
so.
Is there a comparison between the dairy industry and the beef industry? I'm noticing, as I travel to Bradford and Susquehanna County every day, I'm seeing a lot more beef cattle on dairy farms than I've ever seen. High tensile fence, new tractors, barns all fixed up, and 150, 200 head beef cattle on those same farms.
It's a way of life.
Yeah, well, it's a lot
They
easier
don't
to
have to
have.
milk them.
Yeah,
You're right.
I mean,
Right
are
there,
beef
Gunny.
cattle replacing
I have
the dairy
to be
cattle?
back at
Does
5
you see the
o'clock.
decline there?
That's a good question. I don't have any data that would, my observations, your observations would support that. Not seeing any data that would indicate that.
Yeah, because that doesn't break down dairy cattle versus beef cattle, so it just shows cattle.
No, actually, this is dairy cattle.
That is that,
Yeah,
dairy
dairy
cattle.
cattle. This is actually information that it's not listed here. This is data from Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture. They do an annual survey, annual estimate of some things. Dairy cow numbers is one of those things. There is currently the ag census that was going on. The date to turn it in is ended, and it'll take a year or two to get the reports from that data. But that might show other trends as well. It's a more comprehensive look at numbers of farms, numbers of all the different livestock species. Okay, that's all that I had to present. I think there's my summary slide. Then certainly my address and my email, my phone number, you're welcome to contact me. I live over in Honesdale, but I do a lot of work here in the northeastern part of the state. So.
Does anyone have any other questions?
And I can go for another hour and a half if you'd like this.
You didn't bring donuts.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, how familiar are you with pipelines?
Quite a bit, yeah, quite a bit. In fact, that was one of the things that Joe and I talked about, we've been talking about tonight.
Well, see, my question is,
Yes.
and I think it all depends upon the company,